following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case III. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and we are spending winter Sundays in a hot stove league where we just talk ball, and I'm lucky enough to talk ball with some real mavens and real people with a passion for the game that can't be beat. George, we have a great panel. We have Al Blumpkin of Sabre fame is here. Hello, Alan.
Hello, everybody.
All right, Al. David Hubler hasn't arrived. That surprises me. I hope he's well. Ronnie Rabinovitz is here.
Hello, how you doing?
Ronnie is a Jackie Robinson. You're a friend of Jackie's when you were 10 years old. How about
That's
that?
Right. That's right.
And you spend your life passing on part of his legacy to a bunch of kids. You want to take a minute and tell us about that experience, Ronnie?
Well, the first time I was invited to speak to his class, I said, this was in 1987. I said, all right, kids, how many ever heard of Jackie Robinson? And this little boy stood up and said, no, who is she? And I said, who is she? I realized, excuse me, got a little frog in my throat today. I realized that how would they know? So from 1987 on, I've been like a Pied Piper teaching kids about Jackie Robinson. Fortunately, today, most of the kids know because of Black History Month, and it's part of the curriculum, which is wonderful that the teachers are doing that. But I love educating kids. They have a lot of wonderful questions. I can tell you one example. I was telling them what a great athlete he was, and that he was an All-American in football and All-American in basketball, that he broke the world's record in the broad jump and track, and he played baseball. He was the only athlete ever to letter in 4 sports at UCLA to this day. And one of the kids stood up and asked, well, why did he pick baseball? Which was a good question because they didn't know. And I said, well, because that was the only avenue they had, and they had the Negro Leagues, that he could play baseball. There were no African Americans in basketball or in football. And so I thought that was a very good question. But they're learning, and I love to teach them, having a good time.
A life well spent. I don't know what book that's from, but it certainly applies to you, Ronnie. What a terrific asset you are to Comfortably Zoned, and I'm happy to be with you on a regular basis.
Thank you.
George, I digressed. We have a topic today. It is designated hitter, and start with you, George. You're the man. What comes to mind when I say designated hitter? First thing that comes to mind.
Well, there's more than one thing that comes to mind, Ralph. But, hearing Ronnie and with Alan, all of us go back and you and, we're old school. And, we were in our study of baseball history and everything that happened a long time ago. There was no such thing as a DH. You were 9 guys on the team, 9 guys on the field, 9 guys hit, and the pitcher was supposed to hit, and that's the way the game was played. It started to be played that way back in the 1900s or whatever it was. And all of a sudden, now you have a DH where you have American League with a DH and the National League with no DH, which to me is ridiculous. Either have a DH in both leagues or no DH. But to have one set of rules in one league and one set of rules in the other league, I just don't like it. So that's my opinion of the DH. And again, I'm old school, so it'll be interesting to hear what Alan and Ronnie and you, Ralph, have to say about the DH.
Alan, I want to know what your take is when I just say...
Oh, I don't like it. I was at the game at Yankee Stadium in 1973 when it was the first game that they introduced that, and Blumberg was the first DH for the Yankees. But I think that the reason what's ironic is that the National League proposed this in the 1920s because they were being outdrawn. The teams out there were being outdrawn specifically because of Babe Ruth. So the National League did actually propose this in the late 1920s, and it was voted down.
Ralph, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened was after.
What happened? I signed on at noon, and nobody. There was no answer.
Well, we've been on all this time.
Well, you got to check with that source because I sat here and listened to nothing but that music.
In a case like that, I'd try back. David Hubler has joined us. Hello, David.
Hello,
David.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi, David.
Hey, David.
Good. We've been talking about the DH, and I'm getting everybody's reaction to designated hitter, first things that come to mind. Here we go.
Yeah. As I was saying, the National League proposed this in I think it was 1927 or 8, and it was voted down. And the reason that they allowed it in 1973 is because the American League was being outdrawn heavily by the National League, and they felt that they needed this to create some excitement, and it's gotten to the point. I don't like it. I really don't like it at all. But if they try to get rid of it in the American League, the union is going to scream about losing jobs.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. Alan, what you're saying. I agree with you. I don't like the DH. I made myself clear on that, but I have to be realistic. There's no way.
It's not going away.
Yeah, there's no way it's not going to happen.
You're right. There's no way it's going away.
Right. The players union will
never.
They'll never go for it, and I think eventually the National League will adopt it. And that's a fact of life. You can say I don't like it, and I don't like it, but that's what the age we're living in now.
Yeah, they're using it in the low minors, rookie leagues, and that's the way everything. The National League and one of the leagues in Japan are the only two leagues, professional leagues, that don't use it.
Well, if I had my opinion, I would say I don't like it either, and I would prefer the National League not to have it. If it has to stay in the American League, fine, but I'd hate to see it going all the way, both leagues. So I'm old-fashioned too, just like George and Alan.
Okay, with Pittsburgh Pirates first baseman notwithstanding, from the 50s, guys who played in the 50s, who were the walking DHs back then?
Johnny Mize was one of them.
All right,
because when the Yankees had him, he could still hit like he always did, but running was not exactly part of his DNA.
Yeah. Who do you remember as a DH candidate, David Hubler?
I never thought of a DH candidate in those days because there was no such thing. So it never dawned on me.
Who would have been a perfect fit?
Ted Williams.
Well, of course, one who would probably come to mind early is Tommy Henrik, old reliable. If you needed a bat off the bench, I would say Henrik probably, with the Yankees, would do the job.
Okay. Ronnie, any Dodger that coming up that would have benefited from being a DH back in the day?
I would say George Schuba.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, that's a good one, Ronnie.
Yeah, Shotgun Schuba. Right.
Shotgun Schuba.
Yep.
Where did he get his nickname? I'll ask Al Blumpkin.
Right, because of his throwing arm.
Okay. It must have been good.
Yeah.
All right. Then
Dick Stewart would have made a great DH because he couldn't field.
Right?
Yeah.
I was taught.
Yeah, that's what you're referring to, basically.
Yes. Yes. Should they be in the Hall of Fame, David?
Probably not. Henrik was a terrific ball player, and
no, I meant the DH.
Oh, the DH itself.
The DH, guys who are primarily DHs.
There's a good case you could make for them. I mean, Big Papi, was a tremendous DH. That's what he was being paid for. He was one of the, 25-man roster, and that was his job. And he did it very, very well. I hate to say, because he was always a threat against the Yankees, certainly. And I think, frankly, he does deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. That's part of the game. Whatever the rules are at the time, that's what.
Edgar Martinez is probably going to make it in this time around.
Yeah, he probably.
And very close last year.
Mm-hmm.
George, does that offend?
No. I mean, I think, again, being realistic, I think it's going to probably happen. I mean, if you can have the, like what's happened the last couple of days with the Hall of Fame, I mean, anything can happen. But, I would say the DH is probably going to, it's going to happen. Mariano will get in there for a relief pitcher. And to have Martinez or to have Tony Oliva, who I think has been overlooked. And
Gil Hodges.
To have Ortiz. I mean, those are great hitters. I mean, that's what, as David said, that was their job. And, Oliva, it did certainly extend his career because he had terrible knees. But to make him a DH because of physical problems, I mean, it made sense. And as long as the American League had the DH, then they have it. There's other players, though, who, when you're talking about the DH, and, there wasn't a DH in the National League or the American League for many years, but there were some great hitting pitchers. And that's the one problem. When you take the bat away from a pitcher, the way they've done it in the American League, it's rare that you're going to find a guy who's going to be able to hit. Where in the older days, in the days that we're more familiar with, guys like Wes Farrell and Red Ruffing and Warren Spahn and Don Newcomb with the Dodgers, I mean, Walter Johnson in the 20s, I mean, sometimes they were even used as pinch hitters because there was a great hitting pitcher.
They were.
The other one was
Turley comes to mind.
No, Tommy Byrne. Tommy Byrne was Lemon. Lemon came up as a position player.
Right.
Right.
But Bob Lemon was with the Cleveland Indians, and he was a center fielder, and he was a third baseman.
Yeah.
And he was converted by Boudreau. Matter of fact, he and my dad and were part of the starting outfield in 1946, about the first month of the season, and then Boudreau made the decision to convert Lemon into a full-time starting pitcher because he had such a great arm.
Yeah, he played
but as an everyday. Yeah, as an everyday
sorry.
center fielder, he wasn't that great with the bat. But, as a pitcher, he certainly got his hits. And the way we were taught, always were taught, if you're a pitcher and you're not a good hitter, and you get in a situation where you can advance the runners with a bunt or do something, you just don't stand up there and take 3 swings. That's not what the game is all about. The pitcher has to contribute, and if the situation is, he can certainly get up there, and if he's a good hitter, that's one thing. If he's not, then move the runners up.
And
Tommy Byrne was a very good
strategy that it involved? Yeah. Are you going to take the pitcher out? Do you want a pinch hitter? There's so much involved that is missing from the game in the American League compared to the National League. And I'm lucky. I get to watch the A's and the Giants out here. So I see both leagues. I'm happy to have the A's. I'm happy to have the American League. It's just not the same. It is. In
fact, there are two long-time American League players who spent a good portion of their careers as DH that are in already. Paul Molitor and Frank Thomas.
Right.
They've spent a lot of time as a DH,
right?
And they're in, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not going away.
No.
Who said that back? I guess it was George who said, "I'm realistic. It's not going away." But
well, you know what, Ralph? It is. You know, the game has evolved, and you know, some stuff that goes on. It drives me crazy. But anybody who says, you know, well, let's get rid of the DH. I mean, you have to understand the power of the union, and there's no way that the players' union is going to give up those jobs for those American League players. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to wind up with both leagues, which, you know, I think is certainly, in my opinion, is better than 1-1. I just don't like it because it's two sets of rules. It's two different strategies. Some people say, hey, I like the DH because you see the DH in the American League. You don't see it. But to me, as a baseball purist, I like the game the way it used to be played, where you got 9 guys getting up there to hit. And that's the way it was. But on the other hand, baseball has certainly evolved, and you got all the pitch counts, and you got all the specialization, you got all the stuff that goes on. And eventually, I think it's going to happen with the DH in both leagues.
The pitch count drives me crazy too.
Al, I didn't mean to gloss over the fact that they proposed the DH in 1920 in the National League.
I think it was late 20s, something like 27 to 28.
Let me ask you, what was the rule that they proposed similar to what?
Yeah, that they have a hitter bat instead of a pitcher. The pitcher, same thing, basically the same thing.
Wow. Also, how close that rule came to being a designated runner. I think it was Finley who was given the option of which to bring into the league. And I think they finally ended up with the designated hitter over the designated runner. But I think Finley was involved, and he gets...
Yeah, I think you're right, Ralph. I think that guy's name, the player's name was Claudel Washington.
No, Herb Washington.
Or Herb Washington.
Right. He appeared in over 100 games, I think, in 1974 with no play appearances.
Right. And I think even...
And they had a guy before that named Alan Lewis, who wasn't... his ratio wasn't that bad, but he served most of the time as a designated runner.
Yeah, well, you know, I read one time, I think that Washington actually as a designated runner got picked off. which to me is just bizarre. I mean, if you're going to be a designated runner, at least know what you're doing out there. You know, whatever you're going to do, you don't get picked off at first base for crying out loud.
I think Herb Washington was thrown out stealing in 1974. Well, either the LCS or the World Series. He was thrown out trying to steal ones.
Yeah, well, it had to be pretty obvious that if you got the guy on first base, he's there to steal. So, you know, he wasn't any kind of threat because he never, I don't think he had a major league at bat. I think it was.
No, he didn't.
Well, it differentiates a fast runner from a good base runner.
Right.
And, give you a good example. Was a Dodger. I don't think Maury Wills or Willie Davis was known for being a particularly good base runner compared to Maury Wills. He was much faster. Any stories about that, Ronnie?
Yeah, he was. He was much faster. You're right. You know, I don't really have any stories on it, but he definitely was faster.
Yeah. Maury Wills knew the pitcher's tendencies and this, that, and the other thing. He became a true...
He really studied that.
Yeah, one of the problems with designated runner, it means the hitter is out of the game.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
Unless you're watching John Goodman as the Babe.
Oh God.
Yeah.
But basically, players that they use pitchers as pinch runners, you put in a pinch runner, and a couple of years ago when Joe Girardi was managing the Yankees, he pinch run for A-Rod, and he pinch run for Teixeira, and the game would go in extra innings, and both of them were out of the lineup, and they had players who couldn't hit very well, replacing them. He lost a number of games like that.
Well,
you know what? Hey, David, I wanted to ask you something.
He's trying to score
David,
a run.
What's that, George?
No, David had mentioned, you talked about Babe Ruth and that crazy John Goodman movie and all that stuff, but just on Facebook yesterday, I think it was, there was a picture of Babe, coming and touching home plate on his 714th home run at Forbes Field. That put to rest that craziness of Hollywood of having a pinch runner for Babe.
Yeah, that's one of my big bugaboos. I mean, I don't mind some of those biopics that are really
they're ridiculous. I mean, they're written by people who had no knowledge of baseball whatsoever.
I know. No knowledge. It's unbelievable. It's truly not. Yeah, I mean, I could understand if somebody made a mistake writing a script for a soccer match. I don't. Who wouldn't? Most of us wouldn't know the difference. But baseball is baseball. You don't screw around with baseball, right?
No, they screw around with everything. They screw. The last movie that came out on the racehorse, Seabiscuit, the owner and the trainer and everything wanted to win the Santa Anita handicap or whatever the race was. They forgot to mention that they had a horse the year before that won that race.
What is that? I didn't get that. What do you mean?
The connections to Seabiscuit won the same. They had another horse that won the same big race in California the year before.
The same owner,
same trainer, same owner, same jockey. And that they forgot to mention.
Well, I'm sure it wasn't in the book because the book was very good.
Yeah, well, I take a little grain of salt every time they try to make a movie in almost any sport. There was a movie that was made on the 1913 golf tournament, open amateur one.
Perfect Game. It was great.
He in real life he beat the English guy by 5 strokes. There was no contest in the playoff. He won that very easily. And of course they skewed that to make took dramatic license to make the movie more exciting. They do that all the time.
Baseball movies with Kevin.
When they try to do something that's
because at least
real,
he played baseball.
What's that, Ron?
I
love baseball movies with Kevin Costner because at least he played baseball.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ronnie. I mean, that's the thing I like about Costner with his baseball movies is that he played the game, and so to me it's more realistic than.
Yes, they are.
When Anthony Perkins, as an example, a great actor, he's trying to play. Trying to play Jimmy Pearsall, and I don't think that Anthony Perkins ever picked up a baseball in his life.
Yeah, Pearsall hated that movie.
Right.
Yeah, but
he absolutely hated it, and the only thing that came out of that one was that Alfred Hitchcock saw all of Perkins' mannerisms and hired him for Psycho.
Right.
Speaking of movies being made about baseball, we had a guest on these airwaves, Renee James. I don't know if you guys.
Oh yes,
yeah, I remember. Yeah. Yep.
And she is making a movie about the life of Shoeless Joe Jackson.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And since she's been on, she has hooked up with Billy Rob Thornton. Is that his name?
Billy Bob Thornton, yeah.
Billy Bob.
Yeah.
As an executive producer. So she's got a big name with some baseball experience behind her. And she's a Facebook friend, so stay in touch with her. We'll have.
Would you like me to get her back for a guest again?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Ronnie. Ronnie, I think you did that a couple months ago, and I thought she was a very interesting guest. And I'm anticipating that Renee, because she seems to really have her act together, that movie is going to be very well done.
I had her on my podcast as a follow-up to that interview shortly after.
I'll get in touch
she is
with her.
just
I've met her. She's been in Minneapolis. I've met her. We had coffee together. She was terrific.
Right. A good baseball person, and so let's keep up with that movie. It would be nice if her movie turns out to be one of the good ones that we could talk about and say to her when.
Yeah, the ones I don't like, and this goes for fiction too, and that was one of the reasons I wound up writing The Nats and the Grays, was because I've never been able to appreciate a sports movie about a team that doesn't exist or a league that doesn't exist. I find them sort of very trivial, and I can't get too excited or enthusiastic about whether this team is going to win or lose because there is no team. You know what I mean? I much prefer stories that are based on real teams. I mean, like when the Angels in the outfield, it was about the Cleveland Indians. That was fine. I mean, it was a nice fantasy story, but it had a real team attached to it, you know. So it had, to me, it had a little more relevance than just if you pick the Cleveland whatevers. And
David, I agree with you. 100%. The movie I enjoyed was Major League. And for what you're talking about, I mean, it was a comedy, but it was set with the Cleveland Indians, and you could imagine the ball players in the clubhouses. I mean, some of the crazy stuff that goes on. I mean, you know, some of it is really terrific Hollywood script. But on the other hand, you're right. I was talking about a major league team named the Cleveland Indians.
Yeah, even Bull Durham was about a real team.
Yeah, and the other side of that is when you had a lot of people thought The Natural was great, but for me it wasn't that great because the Knights were not a real team.
Exactly.
And there was a Hollywood touch. I've been around baseball all my life. I've never seen a ball hit and explode the lights. Never seen it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, and with the bursting.
There you go. Alan said it best about Hollywood. You get. What was the word you used?
Dramatic license.
Dramatic license, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the same as literary license.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like Bang the Drum Slowly, even though I knew that the team at New York Mammoths was fictional.
Right, but it was very close to the New York Giants in terms of it puts it in your head. They played in a stadium that was close to it. But I want to know...
Anything with De Niro is always good. I don't care.
Yeah.
Anything written by Mark Harris was always good. It wasn't just Bang the Drum Slowly. He wrote a trilogy of books by that character.
In fact, Mark Harris actually saw an early draft of my original book and encouraged me to continue to write it because he really liked it.
Oh, wow. Wow, David. He was an absolute great writer. He would write in the dialect.
Yes, he did.
And sometimes it was difficult to read. It was like Mandingo. You'd have to process... but I loved his books. As a matter of fact, there was a paperback edition of all three of his, the trilogy.
Yeah.
And later, he wrote a book called it seemed like forever.
That's right.
The fourth book he wrote. He passed a few years ago. Never got a chance to interview him.
He was teaching at USC, if I recall, the last contact we had. Another one, Lying in Bed. He wrote Lying in Bed, another strange dialect book. I have most of his books here. He was terrific. Yeah.
Let's go around the room. Who did you read when you were a kid about baseball? You lived it, George Case, but was there any book that you read when you were a kid that jumped out at you?
Well, I can't really, Ralph, I don't remember, but I was surrounded by it so long. I mean, there's so many different books, and a lot of the books that I read, I think, were, baseball guides and all that kind of stuff. But, the baseball books themselves, I was not real happy with a lot of them because I knew they were, as Alan said, their literary license or whatever it is. I mean, some of the stuff you read just isn't true. And it makes for good reading, I guess. But on the other hand, I like things that are accurate and well done. And with my dad being a ball player, I mean, I was pretty much surrounded by baseball and knew a lot of the players themselves. And I personally, did not like baseball books if they were not accurate. And that was just my whole thing as a young kid when I first started reading books. If I had a baseball book, I wanted to read it about somebody that either my dad knew or played with or played against, and that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah,
Now, Blumpkin, you've read more books than more baseball books.
Right, yeah, well, basically,
than I know.
When I discovered, in the library, I discovered the Putnam series. They had one for each Major League Ball club that would give the history of the team, that even though, in those days, most of those books finished in the late 40s. And that's where I started to pick up everything from those books. There were 16 of them. The one on the A's is titled, I think Fred Leadwell is Connie Mack, and it's not titled The Philadelphia A's. And they re-released them in paperback a bunch of years ago, all of them. So that's how I have, because I don't have any of the originals. But that's what got me started. Those books are what got me started. And I'm with George. If I start reading a book and I find a lot of errors in there, it destroys the credibility. There was a book I picked up last year on supposedly, I think it's called Almost Perfect, about the pitchers that lost perfect games in the ninth inning.
And it wasn't.
And there were so many errors. There were so many errors in there that once I got past the Haddix chapter, I couldn't read anymore.
Well, I'll give you a great example of a book that had a classic error in it that went unreported. I'm trying to think. There was a very well-known sportscaster here in Washington, and he went to New York. First, he got a job with the networks in New York, and then he was
Bob Wolf.
No, not Bob Wolf. Warner Wolf. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Last name. So right. Warner Wolf did this book, and it was awful. I mean, another thing you can't do about writing a book, because there was a book about Yogi Berra that was supposedly written in his dialogue, and I couldn't read it because it was just so bad. But the Warner Wolf book contained one of the great errors of all time in sports. And, of course, that's what he was, a sportscaster, and well known for his, let's go to the videotape. Well, he did this book, and I had him in at VOA for an interview, and before we went on the air, I said, listen, I have to tell you, you've got a real error in your book. And he looked at me, where? We were in my office before we went into the studio. So he starts off with one chapter, and I forget which chapter it is. I'll never forget where I was on October 5th, 1950. And that when Bobby Thompson hit his famous, well, that wasn't the real date. That wasn't the date of he had the date wrong. I forget which date it was. I think it was actually 51.
October 3rd, 1951.
Yeah, it was right.
51.
Yeah. So he had it wrong, and he just sort of blanched. And he said, I have to call my publisher. We'll have to correct that in the second edition. And I knew, having read the book, there was not going to be a second edition. It was so bad. You couldn't read the damn thing. And then to start off the chapter, I'll never forget where I was, and then get the date wrong. Just sort of compounded the whole thing.
Yeah, to not even have the right year, David. I mean, that is a big error.
Oh, tremendous. I mean,
and I and some of my close friends will pick up errors right away.
Well, that was an easy one.
Because it hits me right in the face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
As soon as I saw, I mean, he had some interesting stories about covering a game, a football game for ABC, and he raced to the airport to get, in a car rental, and he raced to the stadium, and he got up to the booth just in time, and blah, 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 and it started to snow. Well, the story ends that, of course, he couldn't remember what car was his or where it was parked in this snow-covered lot, and he spent hours looking around to try to find the car afterwards. So, I mean, there were some interesting stories, but the whole book was ruined for me. Simply because he couldn't remember the year, couldn't even check it out, obviously, and that's such a simple error that anyone, somebody could make an error in somebody's batting average in 1935, but
not in that.
Not in that. No, not in that.
Numbers, I'll cut some slack.
That's one number.
The same number, like having one book I had having Judge Landis die in 1945, 3 different places. It's just really. I blame most of this kind of thing on the editors, because the editors in the McFarlane books, some of them have a lot of errors, and I every time I've been to a convention, I offered McFarlane has a table in the book room there. I've offered my services to edit some books, and they always turn me down.
Yeah, because they don't.
Some of them. There was a book that came out a number of years ago on Branch Rickey in Pittsburgh. There's 5 years or 6 years with the Pirates, and there's so many mistakes in there. That's another one I had to stop.
Yeah, well, McFarlane doesn't pay.
Yeah, but I know, but the editing and a lot of
there is no editing.
Very sloppy.
That's what I'm telling you. You're right. There is no editing.
If there's any editing at all.
I'm going to tell you the truth. No one except Josh and myself edited the Nats and the Grays. We were solely responsible. Not that we were solely responsible. We were, but it wasn't part of the deal that somebody was going to go through and do a fact-checking of the book, because it didn't happen. Fortunately, Josh was
Did you get editorial content from these people?
No.
As you went along, not just the grammar?
No. We turned in the manuscript.
Whatsoever. No suggestions of...
Well, the main suggestion, of course, was to write it as nonfiction instead of the fictional account I had presented to them. But we turned in the manuscript after, and as far as I know, no one has found an error in the text.
David, I wanted to compliment you, David, because what David was saying. He went back and forth to me quite a few times, checking with me on certain things, which I want to tell you, David, it was great because it gave me a chance. I heard a lot of stories, and I had to go back and look myself to make sure I was giving you the right information, and you were not going to put something in your book that wasn't accurate. And I thought you did a wonderful job of that.
Yeah, thank you. One of the classes I had to find out why Casey Stengel limped, and I finally found his grandniece, I think she was, and she
from the broken leg in Boston.
Yeah, getting hit by the cab.
Yeah.
And but in the accounts of it that I read, there was no explanation of what had happened to him. And she told me how to strengthen the leg, he would walk from the street up to the house, was on a hill, and he'd walk up backwards to strengthen those muscles in his leg. Interesting little things like that. But Josh was tremendous. I mean, he did an incredible job of proofreading, and in fact, almost to the point where I had to say, Josh, enough! he found little tiny errors in batting averages of 1 or 2 points and things like that. But he was great. He was absolutely invaluable.
I've done some proofreading. I've done some proofreading for David Nemec, and I caught some stuff. In fact, he sent me he's coming out with another trivia book, and he sent me the questions beforehand. And it was pretty good. I didn't have to do too much, but there's still an honor that he asked me to do this for him.
Sure.
Oh. And when they used to come out with these feats, facts, and first every year, I would find some errors. Like he had Tommy Byrne having the most walks in the season since during the period of the 40s and 50s, and I found late 40s and 50s, and I told him no, it was Bob Turley for the '54 Orioles, and he looked it up and said, "You're right." So but he's pretty accurate on most of the stuff.
But you see, they don't use editors at the publishers anymore.
Yeah.
The same thing is true with newspapers. I mean, I think one of the Washington Post's main sports writers had Babe Ruth listed playing left field. You see how in my head, he played right field. I mean,
he's a right field.
Peanut butter and jelly go together. Right. But he had, because nobody checks those things anymore. The
that book, Almost Perfect, you're doing a game by game. How they're missing a perfect game. There aren't that many of them.
No.
And to get stuff wrong in the presentation of a single game is a lot worse than you're doing a general history.
Well, the one thing about writing a book about perfect games is, there were no hits.
Yeah, it's not that hard to get a list of almost perfects. But to come out with details that are wrong in an almost perfect game, it's just sloppy.
Yeah, right. And it sort of gives a new meaning to the title of the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I read a book that I took out of the library in the late 70s, early 80s. It was Al Dark's autobiography. And if I don't have it, and
when Doc fired the manager, I have it, and I got him to sign it at a card show.
Now look, Al, later on today.
Yeah.
Look and see on the last page. There was something wrong, either an opinion that was wrong or a fact that was wrong, and that stuck in my head all these years that that there was a blatant misconception or something on that last page, and so that.
That's your job for next week.
Yeah,
I got so much stuff here. It might be tough to find it.
Okay, then.
But the thing is that
we have a whole week.
Most of you should see what I have here. You wouldn't believe it.
I believe it.
And most of these player autobiographies are ghosted.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, they are absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. You're talking about one of the all-time ghostwriters was Christy Walsh about Babe Ruth. That's how he got his start, was doing all these. And I think Ford Frick was a ghostwriter too.
That's why he makes That's why he made such a stink over Roger Maris.
The asterisk,
right? With the asterisk,
asterisk,
right.
Yeah.
Asterisk.
Yep.
Is because he was a friend of
Ruth. He was a ghostwriter for Ruth.
Yeah. It's been a great conversation this morning, guys.
Great.
It's good. So it gets me through the winter with no baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting close. We're getting closer and closer.
Closer and closer. That's right.
Once we get rid of the Super Bowl, we can really get a lot more ink on the baseball season.
Yeah, one of the things that they're writing about now is how the winter meetings have become a waste of time because nothing really happens there anymore because of the way free agency works now.
Also, the owners are much cleverer than they used to be. The 16 owners, they used to meet every winter in Chicago. Who goes to Chicago in the middle of the winter? These guys today, they go to Vegas. After all, or Palm Springs. They know what they're doing.
I feel badly for the MLB announcers. they didn't have much to talk about. They had to fill time.
I know that. Yeah.
Really something. Yeah. It was a pretty uneventful meetings.
Yes, it was. Yeah. And I think they will be that way for a while.
Oh yeah, it's the way free agents don't sign till late anymore. Yeah.
Right.
There's a minimal movement, and they have to fill it up with nonsense. Each team's prospect when you don't know their roster yet, and these annuals that come out. The Street and I don't know if they still publish any of them anymore. Street and Smith. A few other ones. How can they print something when they in March as a preseason when half the free agents haven't signed, and you know what your roster is going to be? Yeah.
Well, what with the computer, we get daily updates. They update the rosters on the website.
Yeah, but this book, these magazines have to come out at least 2 or 3 weeks before the season starts.
Sure.
And this, it's impossible now. Yeah.
Right.
Well, the printed word is
going. Sadly disappearing. Yeah.
It is, sadly.
Sadly. All right, guys.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, George.
Listening out there.
My pleasure.
George, thank you.
Pumpkin,
okay.
David Hubler, George Case, Ronnie Rabinovitz. This is terrific for me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks, George.
Hey, we'll talk to you guys next week.
Care.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Bye-bye.
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 Be well. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.